The Astrocast.
Welcome back to the Astrocast. I'm your host, Rue. Today is Wednesday, January 8th, 2025. We're about halfway through this lunar cycle, which means if you walk outside in the middle of the day and look up, you'll see half of a moon randomly for some reason. I wish somebody would have explained to me a lunar cycle when I was a child, because I was always just so confused when I walked outside and just saw the moon randomly up during the daytime. Because, you know, as a child, you generally associate the moon with nighttime. So I know I'm not alone in this. Was anyone else just really confused as a kid about why the moon was out during the daytime? Anyway, I'm your host, Rue. Welcome back to the Astrocast. We're actually doing things a little bit weird this week. I started this episode last night because I generally try to get episodes out on Tuesday, though sometimes it's Wednesday, as we know. And I had technical issues last night that required me to basically order a new pair of headphones. Long story short, I got them overnighted, and then I came in and finished the episode. And then I went back and listened to the first half from the recording yesterday and realized that that recording had been impacted by the equipment failure that I had experienced. So it sounded terrible. Long story short, I went through and did my best to clean it up. Part of me was like, maybe I should just let it be but I can't do that. I can't put terrible sounding audio down you guys' ears. I refuse to do it. Anyway, so I'm going to just cover back over those topics which were discussed. So last night, actually not last night, now it was last weekend at this time, I actually finally got around to shooting what is no doubt a yearly winter ritual for all astrophotographers. And I, of course, am speaking about the Great Nebula in Orion. So this is a target that I think if you got your first telescope in the wintertime, it didn't take you long before you pointed your telescope at the Great Nebula in Orion and had a look, because it really is, you know, by far the brightest nebula in our night sky, easily visible to the naked eye from nearly any sky conditions, short of like maybe Bortle 9, I suppose. But I've always been able to see the nebula in Orion from my place, which is now a 7, unfortunately. So, but there's a reason that it's so popular. And that, of course, likely has a lot to do with how beautiful this target is. And it's one of those targets that you can put a little bit of time into and get relatively nice results compared to a lot of other fainter targets, which oftentimes require, 10 to 20 hours of integration before you can even get a decent looking image. I've taken plenty of photographs of Orion over the years that were, a couple to 4 hours long of integration, and they came out quite nice, I think, in the grand scheme of things. So the reason that I'm mentioning Orion is because I wanted to try something a little bit different this year when I was doing my imaging of Orion, because the one thing that I had yet to do in all of the photos that I've taken of M42 was get a really clean picture of the trapezium region. So if you aren't aware, the trapezium region is a small cluster of stars that is kind of at the very core of the Orion Nebula. So if you were looking at it through a visual scope, where the flowers seem to sprout from, I guess would be a good visual analogy, is that core area. And within that area, there are 4 stars that are, closely clustered together that you're able to make out through a, reasonably sized telescope. Small is fine. And these were actually first observed by the very, very famous Galilei, way back in, I think it was 1610 when he first saw the trap. And then he actually jotted it down in his notes. And you can actually look up and see a hand-drawn note from Galileo where he drew the trapezium region as he saw it at the time. And I think he only saw 3 stars the first time that he observed. And then, more later observations brought about more stars, of course. And then as equipment got better and better, as the centuries moved on, we were able to finally reveal all of the beauty within that region. So it's a challenging target, specifically for beginner and amateur, maybe not expert level astrophotographers. And the reason for this is because that core is just such a very, very bright nebulous area because of all the starlight coming off. It's very, very easy to blow out the core, is the phrasing that is used. And by that, I mean the whites become too bright and become clipped, which is another term we use in photography and astrophotography, which basically means it's so bright that you cannot make out any detail. And once this happens, unfortunately, it means that data is not recoverable. So if you've clipped your whites, and generally speaking, when we talk about clipping whites, we're referring to looking at the histogram and seeing a large section of the histogram touching the far right side of the histogram, indicating that the whites are being clipped. But a lot of times with something like Orion, you're not going to notice this until afterwards, when you offload the photos and you're going into post-processing and you're like, wow, look at all this incredible nebulosity. But you don't really pick up on the fact that really, really bright core has more detail to resolve within it the first couple times that you shoot Orion, because you're just blown away by how awesome it looks, and the fact that you were able to get what you did get, maybe taking 3-minute exposures. If you're anything like me, I love 3-minute exposures of everything. Don't ask me why. But anyway, after you've done this a few times and you look at other photographs that people have taken of Orion, you'll no doubt at some point stumble across one that shows that trapezium region very well. But then you'll also notice in that same photo, if you're lucky, that there might be a very dim, fainter section on the outside of the nebula that is also very clearly visible. And then you start asking yourself, how did they do this specifically? Like, logistically speaking, how did they go from, very, very bright nebulous core, also getting those, faint, dim outlines, and then doing it all with 3-minute exposures? Is that possible? Well, it's not really possible. Unfortunately, if all you do is take those, 3-minute exposures, you're never going to be able to see that trapezium region, specifically because of how bright it is. You're always going to clip those whites, and it's never going to be recoverable when you're working in PixInsight or Photoshop or what have you. Now, what is the solution to this? How do we take a photo in which we're still able to get those very faint, dim, beautiful, wispy outside lines of the nebula, but then also capture that really bright core in such a way that it's visible to us? So the first thought that should come to mind for most folks would be an HDR, or high dynamic range image. And when we say HDR, obviously we mean high dynamic range, which basically means the image itself has lots and lots of contrast between the lighter parts of the image and the darker parts of the image. So if you've ever seen like a really good HDR television set, or even a really good HDR movie theater, it can be quite nice at the really nice ones. You'll know that there are scenes like, where somebody's carrying a torch through a dark cave, and you're able to see the really bright spots on the face that gets lit up, but then you're also able to see the really shadowy areas, but you can see them very well, and everything is clearly defined. That is HDR at its best. And we want to incorporate that into our astrophotography so we can get those different exposure levels on different parts of the image. So the outskirts of the nebula, or the really, faint wispy stuff I was referring to earlier, are that's where we're going to want those 3-minute exposures. But on the very interior of the core of the nebula, where it's at its most brightest, that is where we want to employ an HDR technique and actually shoot very short exposures, relatively speaking, so we can capture that trapezium region. Now, there's a couple of different ways that you can do this. Myself personally, I went ahead and made my first HDR image of Orion just last weekend, like I said, and I was able to do it using 5-second exposures and 3-minute exposures. Now, a lot of times you will talk to people and they'll just, kind of off the cuff say, oh, yeah, take 1 second subs, take 3-second subs, 5-second, 10-second, 30-second. They'll just kind of like add random intervals of, times in between, thinking that that's going to, make the image much better. But what they don't really take into account when they're just rattling off numbers like that is the fact that you have to have calibration frames for all of these images as well, if you want to actually properly integrate them. So if, for example, you were like me and you said, okay, I'm going to do 15-second frames for the core and then 3-minute frames for the nebula as a whole, then what I'm going to also want to do is make sure that I have, 5-second dark frames as well as 3-minute dark frames. Now, the flat frames, those can be used on both because your flats are going to be the same. You're just trying to, get rid of dust and, anything that might be vignetting on your image. And that shouldn't make a difference between the 5-second and the 3-minute exposures. But make sure you capture your bias images, or flat darks, if you want to go that route or call them that, as well as flats and darks. And darks in particular, make sure that you get darks for both. So, if you're doing 5 seconds like me, and then 3 minutes, just do, 30 darks for 5 seconds and then 30 darks for 3 minutes. That way, when you go into weighted batch pre-processing and stack these together, they're going to come out looking just as good as one another. Now, one thing I will mention when you're doing the shorter exposure photographs, so in particular, like the 5-second long exposures that I was doing of the core, you will notice that these images are going to be a lot noisier when they first come back. And the reason for that, obviously, is our signal to noise ratio is significantly lower because we don't have that 3-minute exposure time that we do on the, longer or quote unquote better photographs for signal to noise ratio. But we can account for that. We can actually go through and take enough 5-second exposures to where it lowers down that noise ceiling and gets it closer in line with what we're looking for in terms of the 3-minute one. So basically, no matter what length you decide to go with, whether it be 15 seconds or 1 second or 5 second, just make sure that you get enough of those images to get rid of most of the noise. Now, I will say, if you're doing this specifically to get that trapezium region, like most of us would be doing, you probably aren't going to have to like match your integration time for your 3-hour or your 3-minute exposures, rather. Like me, for example, I think I ended up doing 65-second frames in total. And the reason for that was 60 was plenty to get a really clean look at that trapezium region, which is ultimately what I ended up using in the edit. And then the brighter stuff just outside of the core was all integrated using the 3-minute exposures. Now, after we get those images done with weighted batch pre-processing, the one area that needs improvement in the astrophotography community as a whole is how we then process these HDR images. And the reason I'm saying that is because within PixInsight itself, I am not able to find a way. And if you guys do know a way, please feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, and I will gladly mention it on next week's show when we're going over everything. But I don't have a way to load up. Let's say we have all the integration of the 5-second subs and all the integration of the 3-minute subs, and I want to integrate them together into one HDR image. I have not found a way to do that yet. So ultimately, what I ended up doing was I fully edited the 3-minute stack to get it exactly where I wanted it to be, so like in final form pretty much. So long story short, what I personally did to integrate that core was I opened up both of the images within Photoshop, and then I loaded them as a stack, and I did an automatic alignment of the layers. So it was able to actually, line everything up properly for me. And then I used a masking and a really soft brush to kind of slowly bring out the area within the core. And it was an extremely tedious process. I will say I'm fairly happy with the results. I would not print it out and put it on a giant print because I know where the flaws are in that image. And if I saw them in large print, it would just drive me insane because I would know exactly what to look for. But I think the average person at a glance would just be like, holy crap, that's a really great looking HDR image of Orion, which is obviously what I was going for. So I was pretty happy with the results. What surprises me is that we don't have a tool yet for integrating HDR images as well as you would think we should be able to. Like I say, guys, if you do know of any great HDR tools that will allow you to load up multiple photographs and then combine them all together, please feel free to let me know. Reach out to me at astrocast@gmail.com. And I'll be more than happy to share that information with our user base. I will say I'm well aware of the HDR tools within PixInsight so far. And, the ones that I have used, they got some neat tricks to them for sure, but I haven't found one specifically that lets you load up the individual images and then pick the areas that you want to kind of focus on. Like, for example, with my Canon R5 and R7, you can actually set up an HDR shot and it will take 3 exposures at 3 different exposure lengths and then integrate the 3 of them together. That's kind of what I'm wanting to do with astrophotography, but I'm just not able to yet because of software limitations. Anyway, I had a lot of fun shooting Orion, and I am quite happy ultimately with how the photograph came out. But I'll be keeping an eye on my space or on that space for sure moving into the future. And I'm just hoping that there will be better HDR astrophotography tools that come about, because I really feel like it's a underutilized feature within our community, because HDR images can be absolutely incredible. And with, a lot of the really bright and really faint details that we see in these, galaxies and nebula and everything that we're so luckily able to photograph with this amazing equipment that we have, it would be really cool to be able to, play around with some more HDR settings and just see how things come out, see what we can generate and get that's a little bit different, from the last image from last year. So just a thought. And if you guys end up taking a really nice image of Orion that includes that trapezium core as a challenge, please feel free to email me a copy at astrocast@gmail.com. I would love to check it out. So this is pretty much where I stopped last night before everything broke. So I'm going to hand it on off to Pass-Through, and he's going to pick up for the second half of the show. So you might notice a little bit of change in my tempo and energy and vocal range. That's because I'm actually back recording today. I had a little bit of an issue last night with my headphones that prevented me from finishing recording the podcast on Tuesday like I normally do and getting it uploaded. But Luckily, Amazon had some overnight cheap monitor headphones that I was able to procure. Got those all plugged in, got everything working, but I had to do a reset on my board. So I'll have to get my vocal stuff all dialed back in, but hopefully it sounds pretty good. I did a couple tests and it sounded like it was coming out great so far. Also, while we're talking about great astrophotography and people who are making the most with what they have, I thought I'd give a shout out to a longtime online friend of mine, somebody I've looked up to for a long time. His name is Ryder. He goes by Night Rider Astro. If you would like to check him out, I can certainly link to his page, but he's actually featured in his local art gallery in his town of Nil in Australia. And he actually just yesterday, he sold 4 of his photos in just one day. So, that's pretty awesome. I think on my best day, I've sold 2. So to get 4 from a gallery nonetheless in one day is really, really quite impressive. So I just wanted to congratulate you on that achievement, Ryder. Keep up that awesome work. I cannot wait to see the Carina Nebula project that you're currently working on. I believe I read that he's going to be spending 5 nights under Bortle 1 skies, specifically capturing the Carina Nebula. And he does have a mono camera, so I'm sure he'll be capturing it in mono with all of the different beautiful signals that we love to see. So can't wait to see that as soon as possible, Ryder. The Carina Nebula is just so freaking beautiful. I love it. Every time I see the photographs of it, my jaw just drops, and it just makes me want to live down in, the southern hemisphere for the next 15 years or so. I wonder how many people who get really passionate about astronomy and astrophotography and have the means to do so end up getting a vacation home in the southern hemisphere specifically for that purpose. I know I don't know, but 7 degrees of separation know a doctor who actually built a remote observatory down in the southern hemisphere. I believe he actually built it in Chile. He's known through the observatory, the Charlotte Club here. And he's got more data than he knows what to do with. So I guess it is doable, if you're able to, get that money together to buy yourself a house down in Chile. I don't think I'm quite there yet. I'd be satisfied with, Bortle 5 skies from my backyard, but God knows that's not going to happen. I will say I've been rather lucky these last few weeks in that I've actually been able to do a little bit more astrophotography from my yard because, the light pollution is just getting so bad here. It's getting darn near pointless to even try because it's so bright. I don't even bother wearing a red headlamp. No need for that with all the street lights and porch lights and everything else that we've got going on around. You can see just fine. So it definitely eliminates the more long exposure, super wide field stuff. If I'm going for something with my, quote unquote real telescope, the 80 millimeter doublet, then, I can get decent results on the brighter objects like Orion and what have you. But you certainly wouldn't go for something like the Witch's Head Nebula, which is a really, faint target that does pretty much demand dark skies to get a, clean view of it. And requires broadband imaging. You can't, go narrow band when you're doing that type of imaging and reflection nebula and what have you. And, those are the kind of things that are just being slowly milked away from me one at a time. And it's driving me nuts. To that end, I started looking into filters recently, and maybe not how you're thinking when I say filters. So I already own, several narrowband, dual narrowband, and broadband filters. When I say broadband, I mean like the Optolong L Pro, for example, which is known to, reduce light pollution, reduce street lamp light pollution, etc. But what I can't do is use those filters on my Canon cameras. So like my R5 and my R7. And one of my favorite things to do, as you guys probably know, if you're longtime listeners of the show, is just take photos of constellations. I absolutely love doing it. But one of the things that you very quickly run into when you're doing, photography on constellations or ultra wide field, if you want to call it that, is that your constellations tend to get completely washed out within all the other stars. Because as soon as you do a 10-second subframe, then all of the background stars are going to start coming out as well. And even the brightest stars like your Betelgeuses and Siriuses tend to kind of fade away into the background amongst all of those others, and it can be extremely difficult to even make out a constellation whenever you're looking at a photograph that is taken that way without any kind of filter whatsoever. So I started looking around. I started by going to Astro because I knew that I had seen lots of the types of shots that I was going for on Astro over the years, but I realized I had never taken the time to actually look over the specific equipment that they were using and try to see if I have an equivalent on my side. And what I'm talking about specifically are these really wide field shots that show several constellations. In particular, a really famous one is the Winter Circle, which would include obviously Orion and Barnard's Loop, and then all of the surrounding nebulas and nebulosity in that area. That's kind of if not the most famous, super wide field target that there is. It's definitely up there. So when I was looking at them, I was noticing that they were able to make those kind of main stars, if you will, really stand out on their own and not get lost in the sauce with, all of the fainter, lower magnitude stars in the background. So I went and looked into the equipment that they were using. And a lot of times it was, very similar to my own in terms of, a mirrorless camera and, whatever lens, 14 millimeters to 70 millimeters, depending on the, focal length that they were going for. But the one thing that kept coming up that I kept seeing were people using soft diffusion filters. So I first saw that word and I said, a soft diffusion filter. Why didn't I think of that? And I went and looked up soft diffusion filters and saw that, a lot of times they are used to kind of give like a more retro vibe. The photo tends to look a little bit older. It's softer. It's not as mechanically sharp, I guess you could say, as modern mirrorless technology has gotten us to where, photos are basically perfectly sharp if you nail the focus every time. But instead it, really softens the edges, as the name would imply. And I was actually kind of surprised at how many different options there are for different types of soft diffusion filters. So I saw some that were like white mist and black mist and, eighth strength, half strength, quarter strength, etc. And then I also noticed a different filter that was made by a company called Koken. And these were actually square filters. So, square rather than like a screw-on type filter that would go into the end of a lens, or even a one that goes in front of the body and behind the lens, like a pop-in filter, if you will. It was instead a square piece of translucent material that goes on the front of the camera, and you basically buy a screw-on ring for whatever type of lens you have. So if you have like a 82 millimeter filter ring size for your lens, you would buy the filter holder for that same size. And then you can go on Koken's site and basically choose from a whole bunch of different types of diffusers. But that's not really what I was looking for. I wasn't looking at their brand new stuff, because when I started poking around, I realized you can go on eBay and some other sites and find very, very inexpensive old copies of their old filters. And in particular, I was looking for the diffusion one. And the reason in particular that I was looking for that particular diffusion filter is because I had actually seen it mentioned in Astrobin several times. And I believe that one of the kind of all-time most famous astrophotographers was known to use these Koken filters at one point in his career. So if you've never heard of him, the name I'm referring to is one Akira Fujii. May he rest in peace. He is actually probably the definitive Japanese astrophotographer. He was extremely well known for his artwork, and it was published in lots and lots of areas before astrophotography became as mainstream as it is today. Well, I don't know if mainstream is the word, but definitely before it was as popular as it is today, he was definitely putting in work. And he in particular was known for using diffusion filters, and he would use them in creative ways. So like, for example, he would take a 30-second exposure of the Milky Way, but he would hold the diffusion filter in front of the lens for the first 15 seconds that it exposed, and then remove it and create kind of a unique effect on the stars by doing that. And the reason I mention all this to you is because, again, those same Koken filters that he used famously in his photography can be had for very, very little. If you look around, there's sellers on eBay that sell these things for $5 to $10 a piece. You do have to get the filter holder to hold it on. But if you have a 3D printer at home, it's something that you could probably print yourself if you're a little bit handy. And then the filter holders are also fairly inexpensive too. Now, I think one thing that is worth mentioning on these filters in particular is they are not made of glass. So they are actually made of optical grade resin. So it's basically like a really high quality plastic that's specifically designed for optical clarity and durability. A lot of eyeglasses use optical resin for their lenses because they're so scratch resistant and can last longer for sports and those sorts of things. But it's worth mentioning because I don't know if this is the type of filter you would want to put in front of your telescope if you're doing like a 3-hour session. It's not really made for that, but rather if you're just trying to get a really, beautiful photo of the night sky, then you could use these filters for that. Now, that's not to say that you can't play around with, true, long exposure photography stacking while using the filter. Perhaps you could do like he did and try it in different ways, put the filter in front, remove it, etc., and those sorts of things. I do want to try some of the more, I guess, standard diffusion filters, if you could say that. I bought one of the 82 millimeter white mist style soft diffusion filters, and I'm going to give that a try just to see how it looks, because ultimately I just want the, primary stars in any constellation to pop a little bit more than they do right now in my photos. And then all the nebulosity and all of, that beauty can be laid behind it, no problem. So, if I wanted to take 3 hours wide open at f2.8 on my Canon L lens to gather all that nebulosity, and then maybe just take a single 30-second shot of the stars with the filter in front of it, and then basically remove all the stars from the 3 hours and then lay the 30-second stars on top, then you kind of get the idea of how you can make that work in, actual long form astrophotography, if you want to call it that. So just some different ideas that I had. It's kind of a fun time of year to try out different things, as long as it's not 15 degrees outside when you're outside messing around. But I thought it would be worth mentioning because I'm certainly going to have some fun with this, and I want to see if I can try to recreate some of the amazing work that he's done, just to challenge myself. If you ever want to challenge yourself in photography, if you ever feel like you are getting bored with your work or lacking inspiration, one of the best ways to inspire yourself is by looking at other people's work. And that's why websites like Astro are just so crucially important for astrophotographers. If you go on to Astro you can use, a whole host of different tools that they have available. But what I love doing is looking at images that are taken with equipment that I own. So, I'll even go on there and see, what images were taken with a Canon R7 and a 16 millimeter Canon RF lens, just like a weird combination that you wouldn't expect to even be on AstroBin, but there are so many images on there with so much different equipment than usually you will find results for whatever you're looking for. So, another great thing you can do is if you're ever thinking about buying a new telescope or a new lens, obviously you have applications like Stellarium that can simulate the view for you. So if you want to get like an idea of what your field of view is going to look like with a given telescope before you purchase it, then obviously you can use Stellarium. You can go in there, you can manually enter in the details of the telescope, such as the aperture, the focal length, and these sorts of things. And then it will simulate the view in front of any nebula to let you know how much of the frame it's going to fill up. Again, depending on what kind of camera you use. But what it doesn't tell you is, what it's actually going to look like when everything is said and done. And that's where tools like AstroBin become just totally invaluable, because you wouldn't know that a lot of my work was done on a doublet scope because of how well, star reducers work these days and all the awesome tools that we have like Blur Exterminator and, Star Exterminator and what have you. But you would certainly know if we didn't have them and you were comparing it directly to something like a Red Cat, because, they generally are just going to have more pinpoint stars right out of the box with their optical design. And, you can usually get a pretty good idea of what the equipment's going to look like by looking at AstroBin. And another thing I've noticed is that the community is very engaging, in that anytime that I have commented on somebody's work and said, wow, that's really impressive, can you give me a little bit more info about, X, Y, or Z? I pretty much always get a response on it, because people love, talking about how they obtain these amazing results. Like I was asking a guy a couple weeks ago, he had the image that I was talking about earlier, the winter circle. He had just an incredible image of it. And I complimented his photo and said, what gear did you use specifically? Did you use any specific filters? And was your camera Astro modified and those sorts of things? And he let me know that, he used 2 different cameras. He used one with a red booster, and then his other one was fully Astro modified. So he kind of used a combination of different gear, which is, not uncommon at all when you're doing a big project like that. So if you haven't, definitely check it out. It's astrobin.com, and you can make an account for free on there. They do have paid premium models. Not a sponsor of the show, by the way. I'm just a big fan of AstroBin, that you can use to, upload more content and, get access to more features. They give you some better search features, I believe, where you can look for really specific equipment setups if you're a paid member. But the free account is also very, very good, and it will certainly allow you to start uploading your photos and listing what kind of equipment that you have as well. And it's just a super easy and fun way to share your work with the world. So definitely check that out at astrobin.com when you get a chance. Really is an awesome tool. I'm just looking here, flipping through it right now, and I just did a search for Rokinon 135. That's all I searched for. And instantly I've got just hundreds of results of images that were taken with the Rokinon 135 lens. And you can see everything from, the most beginner of beginner, type images, all the way up to stuff that will make your jaw absolutely drop, that you say, how on earth did they get that with a Rokinon 135? And I think that's kind of the beauty of it, because you can see, the low end and the very high end of where any potential gear could get you if you're willing to take your time and really go through it deeply. Because if you're willing to, search for the exact equipment that you're looking to get, and then, look through all those photos, you'll know that you can attain similar results if you're able to, get to similar skies and do similar exposures and those sorts of things. So that's just kind of my general recommendation for the week, is just to check out AstroBin when you get a chance, make an account. I've got one on there. I don't have a ton of stuff uploaded yet, but if you guys want to follow me, oh, weird, they use real names. So yeah, look me up as Chris Page. You'll never hear me refer to myself as Chris. I pretty much exclusively go by Rue. And you didn't hear me say that, so just forget that I said that. Seriously though, check it out. Look me up on there. I am looking right now. I've got one of my all-time favorite Aurora Borealis photos that I was able to take during the May 10th storm, and I'll work on getting a few others up there as well. Might as well do a shameless plug for my own website while I'm promoting someone else's for free. If you want to check out qcru.com, I am working on putting up new photos on there, and I might actually be doing another run of prints in the near future. So I'm thinking about doing some A3 plus size prints of some of my best photos that have come out. And I don't know how I'm going to distribute those yet. So, keep your eye out for that. If that's something that you might be interested in, if any of you guys do want to print, feel free to email me at ruastrocast@gmail.com. We can talk. Another quick thing I'll mention to you guys while I'm thinking about it, my wife actually gifted me something quite handy for astrophotography for Christmas, and I forgot to mention it to you guys. If you happen to have a fluid head video tripod, you might use it for photography, but I think generally speaking, the fluid heads are made to be able to easily move the camera for doing video scenes and those sort of things. They tend to be very, very sturdy tripods, and I would think, well, the one I have anyway is certainly strong enough to hold a star tracker, and more than likely could hold like a full-fledged equatorial mount without any problems. I found out that you can actually get a conversion head for the tripod that puts a bowl with a 3/8 of an inch screw on it. So you can basically screw on a ball head or screw on a star tracker if you have something like a Skyguider Pro or a Skywatcher 2i with the 3/8 large screw hole on the bottom of it. You can actually attach it to that. So it ends up being a lot more stable than using the video head for obvious reasons, and lots of ways to easily mess up polar alignment when you're on a fluid head because of all the different things that need to be tightened down and what have you. But I thought I'd mention it just because it's an inexpensive way to convert something that you might have laying around if you were like me into something that's a lot more friendly for astrophotography, because I do love taking out my Skyguider Pro, even though it's, probably the least used among my 3 mounts. I still do love taking it out, especially if I'm just, taking, super wide field shots of the night sky. It's kind of the perfect way to do it. And that just gives me yet another option instead of having to, take apart one of my other mounts and grab that tripod. So if you're in a similar boat, maybe that'll help you out. One other thing to mention from a couple weeks back, I actually, I know I kind of touched on this last week, but I wanted to make sure that I mentioned it, being that we kind of had a whole episode on radio astronomy. If you guys didn't happen to catch it, the Jove project, which is NASA's amateur radio astronomy project that they run, they actually do sell kits that you can build your own radio telescope with, or you can just get the designs from them and kind of go out and get all the parts yourself, because it is all commercially available to folks like us. And then they can provide the software that you need as well. So if that is something that you're interested in doing, you can certainly check that out. radiojove.gsfc.nasa.gov is the website. I will put that in the show notes. I know I said I was going to last week and I kind of forgot to. My apologies, but I'll put that in the show notes for you guys. So if anyone is interested in doing that, we'll have that available to you. Still looking for an amateur radio astronomer to come on the show and talk with us. So if anyone is out there who knows one or is one, please feel free to email me at ruastrocast@gmail.com, because I would love to talk to you a little bit more about radio astronomy. All right, guys, I know this is a bit of a mishmash episode. It was a little weird how it came out this week with me having hardware troubles halfway through the episode, but we managed to get through it. I think we talked about some interesting things. Hopefully I gave you a couple of ideas. I'll rattle off a few of the less known winter targets before we get out of here. If you're looking for something to shoot and you're already, getting bored of shooting Orion and the Horsehead Nebula, You may have heard of these before. They're not, super uncommon because what is, but perhaps it'll, jostle your memory and you can say, oh yeah, I wanted to have a crack at that this winter before it disappears from the sky for galaxy season, which will be here before we know it. So let's go ahead and do that before we run up out of here. So first of all, one that I absolutely love. I haven't shot it this year yet. I need to because it is one of my favorite nebula in the winter skies, but the Seagull Nebula. I don't feel like it ever gets as much love as it should. You never see people posting it on any of the more popular sites. You just don't see too much of it. So it can't be that popular, but I don't know why, because it really does look like a seagull in flight. It's a pretty bright Ha nebula, hydrogen alpha that is, that, is fairly easy to capture with a wide field setup. So if you haven't tried capturing the Seagull Nebula yet, its catalog number, by the way, it's IC2177. If you need that, that is a really, really cool target to check out. It's located in Monoceros and right kind of on the edge of Monoceros and Canis Major. It's lower in the night sky. So like right now, you'll want to wait until a little bit later in the evening before shooting it. And you'll want to have a semi-low southern horizon so you can get to it. But a really, really fun target for the winter. Another one that's starting to come up right now is Thor's helmet. I actually I shot that one last year and absolutely love the results. I did it at 448 millimeters, which is my 80 millimeter doublet scope reduced, and it came out great. So if you've got, something in the 300 to 600 millimeter range, as far as scopes are concerned, I would highly recommend that you check out Thor's helmet, catalog number NGC 2359. And that one also located in Canis Major, not too terribly far from Sirius. So the more obvious ones, the Rosette Nebula, obviously, I think most people know that. If you haven't shot the Rosette somehow, Caldwell 49, located in Monoceros as well, highly, highly, highly recommend you doing that. It's one of the more striking nebula that we have in our night sky right now, and it's really, really cool. Christmas Tree Cluster in the Cone Nebula. I've always really admired that. That was one of the first nebula that I ever shot in the winter skies. So it's got a close place in my heart because of that. And that's also located in Monoceros. There's quite a few in Monoceros if you haven't figured that out. It is a pretty large constellation. And then let's see, we'll say the Jellyfish Nebula, which is in Gemini. So up near Pollux and Castor. That's another great one. Super fun to shoot. Really looks like a jellyfish. Can't really miss it. And that one is really good to do in narrowband as well. So if you have a dual narrowband filter, that's a great one to use in the winter, which is, kind of rare for narrowband targets. I think in the Northern Hemisphere, we don't break out our narrowband filters nearly as much in the winter as we do in the summer months. So finally, the last one is going to be Lowers Nebula, which is catalog number is SH2. So it's from the Sharpless catalog, SH2-261. And that's located in Orion. And it is very faint, but oh man, is it beautiful. So highly, highly recommend checking that out. It's rich in hydrogen alpha, but it is beautiful, smaller, but really, really pretty. So check those out. If you haven't yet, I would highly recommend shooting the Seagull Nebula. And then Thor's helmet is super cool. I mean, the first time I got that, I was kind of blown away. It's one of the first nebula that you see and you're like, oh my God, that looks exactly like what it's called, which is super cool. Cause we have a lot of them that are called one thing that don't really look like it at all. Like Jeff from Dark Dragon says, I've never seen Pac-Man in the Pac-Man Nebula. So just something to consider there, but definitely some cool targets for the winter. I hope you guys are enjoying your winter imaging. I know I certainly am, and I'm planning on getting out some more, hopefully tonight if it clears up. We do have some wintry weather coming in supposedly on Friday here in Charlotte. We haven't had so much as a trace of snow in 5 years. So if we do, that will really be something special. So we'll have to wait and see what happens. Recommendation for this week. It's going to kind of follow on a prior recommendation. I finished the first book in the Silo trilogy, and I'm about halfway through the second book now. And I'm far enough into where I felt like it was okay to start the show on Apple TV. And it's actually really good. So it pretty much hits all the main points in the book. It does some things in a little bit of a different order. But the acting is all really, really well done. The storytelling is great. My wife is even really enjoying it. She's happy for me to put on an episode. So, good to watch with a significant other as well, if you're into that. So definitely check that out. It's on Apple TV Plus, which I know isn't one that everyone has, but I think if you buy a new Apple device, you kind of get like 6 months free of Apple TV. So if you haven't used that yet, maybe check that out if you have it. So that will do it for us this week, guys. I thank you so much for listening in. I hope you get outside. I hope you're able to enjoy some nice clear skies. My name is Rue, and you have been listening to the Astrocast. We will be back next week with another new episode, but until then, clear skies.
Listening to the Astro.